I was deep in debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code when my phone buzzed against my desk. The notification showed a text from my mother, and what I read made my hands start shaking. Rent goes up to $800 next month unless you start watching Emma after school and weekends. We're tired of paying babysitters. You live here practically free anyway. This is non-negotiable. I read it twice then, a third time, hoping the words would somehow change. After 2 years of rebuilding my life in my childhood bedroom, following my divorce, working 60-hour weeks to save money for my own place, I never expected my own parents to trap me like this. My name is Damon, and at 28 years old, I thought I had finally started getting my life back on track. The divorce from my ex-wife had been brutal, leaving me financially devastated after splitting assets and paying legal fees. Moving back into my childhood home had felt humiliating, but my parents had offered me the spare bedroom for just $200 a month while I rebuilt my savings. It seemed like a reasonable arrangement at the time. What made this situation even more complicated was my little sister, Emma. Born when I was 20, she was now 8 years old, and basically felt more like a niece than a sister. Don't get me wrong, I loved the kid, but there was a 20-year gap between us that made our relationship naturally different from typical siblings. Emma was sweet, but incredibly demanding, the kind of child who required constant attention and supervision. She had what my parents politely called behavioral issues, which really meant she threw spectacular tantrums when things didn't go her way. My parents, Carol and Frank, ran a successful accounting firm together. They had done well for themselves over the years, recently purchasing a new boat and a vacation home in the mountains. Money wasn't tight for them by any stretch of the imagination. Carol was 52, sharp as a tack when it came to business, but had grown increasingly cold and calculating over the years. Frank at 55 had always been the more passive parent, preferring to avoid conflict and let Carol make most of the family decisions. That evening, I confronted them in the kitchen while they were preparing dinner. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but my stomach was too knotted with anxiety to feel hungry. Carol stood at the counter chopping vegetables with mechanical precision while Frank sat at the kitchen table reviewing some client files. "We need to talk about that text message," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Carol didn't even look up from her cutting board. "What's to discuss? It's a simple arrangement that benefits everyone." Benefits everyone. I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. "How does this benefit me? I work full-time mom. I stay late most nights trying to build my portfolio so I can advance my career." Frank finally looked up from his papers, but his expression was apologetic rather than supportive. "Son, we spend over $600 every month on after-school care and weekend babysitters. That's more than we're charging you for rent. And we need more family time." Carol added, though, what she really meant was more time for their social activities and golf games. Emma needs stability, and who better to provide that than her big brother? I felt my frustration building. But I'm trying to rebuild my career. I have weekend programming projects that could lead to better opportunities. I'm finally making progress after everything that happened with the divorce. Carol set down her knife and turned to face me, her expression as cold as winter morning frost. "Programming can wait, Damon. Family comes first. Emma is your sister, and it's time you stepped up and took some responsibility around here." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but it became increasingly clear that this wasn't really a discussion. My parents had already made their decision, and they were simply informing me of the new reality. What made it worse was how they framed it as some kind of favor to me, as if they were doing me a service by allowing me to provide free childcare in exchange for not tripling my rent. Then came the moment that changed everything. Carol walked over to the kitchen counter and pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before. "Actually, Damon, I should mention that I already canceled Emma's after-school program. Her last day is Friday, so you'll need to start picking her up on Monday." My blood ran cold. "You already canceled it, without even discussing this with me first." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it whatsoever. "I knew you'd understand once you thought about it rationally." You're such a good big brother, and Emma adores you. It's really the perfect solution for everyone involved. Frank nodded along, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. It'll be good for both of you, son. Emma needs a strong male role model in her life. I stood there in that kitchen surrounded by the familiar smells and sounds of my childhood home and realized that my parents had orchestrated this entire situation without any input from me whatsoever. They had made unilateral decisions about my time, my responsibilities, and essentially my entire future, then presented it as a done deal. The choice was simple: become Emma's unpaid nanny, or find myself homeless with barely enough savings for a security deposit anywhere decent. As I headed upstairs to my room that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. My parents had shown me exactly how much they respected my autonomy and my goals. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Monday morning arrived with the crushing weight of my new reality. I'd spent the weekend researching apartments online, but everything within my budget was either in dangerous neighborhoods or required first month, last month, and security deposit up front. With only about $8,000 in savings, I couldn't afford to move out without risking financial disaster again. The first week of my forced babysitting duty began with a harsh wake-up call about just how much work caring for Emma actually involved. My parents had made it sound simple, but the reality was exhausting and completely disruptive to my professional life. Monday was a disaster from the start. I had an important client meeting scheduled for 3:30 that afternoon, a presentation I had been preparing for weeks. When 2:30 rolled around, I had to send an awkward email to my boss, Marcus, explaining that I needed to leave early for family obligations. Marcus was understanding but clearly not pleased about the last-minute change. I could see the concern in his eyes as I gathered my things and rushed out of the office. Picking up Emma from school was only the beginning. She had soccer practice at 4, which meant I had to drive her home, help her change into her uniform, grab her water bottle and cleats, then drive across town to the soccer fields. While she practiced, I tried to work on my laptop from the sidelines, but between cheering her on and dealing with other parents who wanted to chat, I got almost nothing accomplished. Tuesday brought a new challenge when Emma had a complete meltdown at the grocery store. We had stopped to pick up ingredients for her school lunch, and when I refused to buy the expensive organic fruit snacks she wanted, she threw herself on the floor in the cereal aisle and screamed loud enough to wake the dead. Other shoppers stared at us with a mixture of judgment and pity while I tried to calm her down. A store employee approached to ask if everything was okay, which only made the situation more embarrassing. By the time we got home, I felt completely drained and humiliated. Wednesday was piano lesson day, which I discovered when Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called me at work to complain that Emma hadn't practiced her scales all week. Apparently, this was something my parents had been handling, but they had failed to mention it during their simple arrangement speech. Mrs. Patterson was a stern woman in her 60s who clearly questioned my capability as a caregiver when I admitted I didn't even know what pieces Emma was supposed to be working on. Thursday's crisis involved the soccer coach benching Emma for missing practice the previous week. Apparently, my parents had simply forgotten to inform the coach about the caregiver change, so Emma was marked as an unexcused absence. The coach, a competitive man named Dave who took 8-year-old soccer very seriously, lectured me about commitment and consistency, while other parents within earshot nodded in agreement. I felt their judgment like a physical weight on my shoulders. The weekend was supposed to be my time to catch up on work and maybe have some semblance of a social life. But my parents had other plans. Friday evening, Carol announced that she and Frank were taking the boat out for the weekend and wouldn't be back until Sunday evening. Emma had been invited to a birthday party on Saturday afternoon, which meant I would be responsible for finding an appropriate gift, wrapping it, and supervising her at a Chuck E. Cheese filled with screaming children and frustrated parents. While I was dealing with arcade games and birthday cake, my parents were posting photos on social media of expensive waterfront restaurants and sunset boat rides. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Here I was feeding Emma mac and cheese from a box, while they enjoyed lobster and wine at some upscale marina restaurant. My work situation was deteriorating rapidly. I had missed 3 important client calls that week because I was dealing with Emma's various activities and mini crises. 2 project deliveries were late because I simply couldn't focus on coding while simultaneously helping with homework and managing a child's schedule. My coworkers Ryan and Alex had started giving me concerned looks, and I could feel the professional distance growing between us. The financial strain was becoming apparent as well. My parents claimed the household budget was too tight to cover Emma's activity fees and incidental expenses, despite the fact that they were in the middle of a kitchen renovation that had cost more than I made in 6 months. I found myself paying for Emma's soccer cleats when she outgrew her old ones, covering the cost of piano books and buying groceries for her school lunches. My carefully maintained savings account was bleeding money at an alarming rate. The social isolation was perhaps the worst part. My college friend Brad had called several times to make plans, but I had to keep declining because of Emma's schedule. A woman named Amy, whom I'd met through a dating app, had suggested meeting for dinner on Saturday night, but Emma came down with a stomach bug that evening, leaving me to clean up vomit and take her temperature instead of enjoying adult conversation and potential romance. The final straw of that second week came when I overheard a phone conversation that shattered any remaining illusions I had about my parents' motivations. I was helping Emma with her math homework at the kitchen table when Carol's phone rang. She stepped into the living room to answer, but I could hear every word through the thin walls. "Oh, Patricia, you should see how well our little plan is working," Carol said to her sister, her voice filled with smug satisfaction. "Damon is completely trained now. He picks up Emma, handles all her activities, deals with the homework drama. It's like having a live-in nanny, except we don't have to pay him." There was a pause while Patricia responded, then Carol laughed. "The best part is he'll never leave now that he's trapped. We're saving over $7,000 a year, and our failure son finally contributes something useful to the family. It's really killing 2 birds with 1 stone." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The casual cruelty in her voice, referring to me as their failure son and describing me as trapped, revealed the true nature of what they had done. This wasn't about family responsibility or helping out during a tough time. This was a calculated manipulation designed to exploit my vulnerable financial situation for their convenience and profit. As I sat there listening to my mother laugh about my predicament, I realized that this arrangement wasn't temporary. They had no intention of ever letting me move on with my life. In their minds, they had found the perfect solution to their childcare needs, and my dreams and goals were completely irrelevant to their plans. The question was, how long was I going to let them destroy my future for their convenience? The second month of my forced servitude brought new levels of manipulation that made me understand just how deep this rabbit hole went. My parents weren't content with the current arrangement. They were actively working to make my situation even more restrictive and permanent. It started with Carol announcing additional activities for Emma without any consultation with me. Tuesday and Thursday swimming lessons at the community center across town, Saturday morning art classes at a studio downtown, and Sunday afternoon play dates with various classmates. Each new commitment required transportation supervision and often additional expenses that somehow became my responsibility. "Emma needs to be well-rounded," Carol explained when I protested the packed schedule. "These activities are important for her development, and since you're already handling her care, it makes sense for you to coordinate everything." The swimming lessons were particularly challenging because they required me to leave work at 2:30 twice a week. My boss Marcus had been understanding about occasional early departures, but this was becoming a regular pattern that affected my ability to complete projects and attend important meetings. The art classes meant my Saturday mornings were completely consumed, and the Sunday playdates eliminated any possibility of weekend social activities or rest. My professional life was crumbling under the pressure. During my third week of the new schedule, Marcus called me into his office for what he diplomatically called a performance check-in. The small conference room felt suffocating as he laid out his concerns with clinical precision. Damon, I've noticed some changes in your work quality and availability. Marcus said, his expression serious but not unkind. 3 missed client calls this month, 2 late project deliveries, and several instances where you've seemed distracted during team meetings. Is everything okay at home? I wanted to explain the impossible situation I was trapped in, but how could I make him understand without sounding like I was making excuses? I've been dealing with some family responsibilities that are requiring more time than I anticipated. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying my face carefully. Look, I understand that life happens and we try to be flexible here. But our clients depend on consistency and reliability. I need to know that you can commit to your responsibilities here, or we might need to discuss alternative arrangements. The phrase alternative arrangements hung in the air like a threat. In corporate speak, it was a polite way of saying my job was on the line. I assured him that I would work harder to manage my schedule, but we both knew the conversation was really a final warning. Meanwhile, my personal life was disintegrating completely. Jessica, a marketing manager I had dated briefly before my marriage, had reached out through mutual friends with an offer of freelance work. Her company needed someone to redesign their e-commerce platform, and the project would pay $3,000 for what amounted to about 40 hours of work. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I needed to build my portfolio and supplement my income. But Emma's schedule made it impossible. Between after-school pickup activity, transportation, homework supervision, and weekend commitments, I couldn't find 40 consecutive hours to focus on complex coding work. When I tried to work on the project during Emma's swimming lessons, the pool area was too noisy and humid for concentration. Saturday mornings were consumed by art classes, and Sunday afternoons were filled with chaperoning playdates. After 2 weeks of struggling to make progress, Jessica called to check on my timeline. I had to admit that I couldn't commit to finishing the project by her deadline. The disappointment in her voice was palpable, and she mentioned that she had already turned down other developers to give me the opportunity. She stopped calling after that conversation, and I lost both the income and a potential professional connection. The financial pressure was becoming unbearable. My savings account, which had contained $8,000 when this arrangement began, had dropped to $1,200. Between covering Emma's activity fees, buying supplies for her various classes, and maintaining my own basic expenses, money was flowing out faster than I could earn it. My parents claimed their household budget was stretched thin by their kitchen renovation. But I noticed they had recently purchased a new outdoor furniture set that cost more than I made in a month. The social isolation was taking a psychological toll as well. My college friend Brad visited one weekend and was shocked by what he witnessed. Emma had a meltdown because I wouldn't let her eat ice cream for breakfast, and my parents were conveniently absent at their book club. Brad watched me negotiate with a screaming 8-year-old for 20 minutes before she finally calmed down enough to eat actual breakfast. "Dude, this isn't normal," Brad said quietly while Emma watched cartoons in the living room. "You're 28 years old, and you're living like a single parent without any of the legal rights or decision-making authority. Your parents are basically using you as free labor." His observation stung because it was completely accurate. I had all the responsibility but none of the authority. When Emma's teacher wanted to discuss her behavior issues, she called my parents. When medical forms needed to be signed for school activities, I couldn't provide authorization. I was doing the work of a guardian without any of the recognition or legal standing. The breaking point came on a Saturday night when I had finally arranged a date with Amy, a nurse I had met through a dating app. We'd been texting for weeks, and she had agreed to meet for dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. I had arranged for Emma to spend the evening with a friend, confirming the plans multiple times with the other parent. An hour before I was supposed to pick up Amy, Emma started complaining of a stomachache. What began as mild discomfort quickly escalated into full-blown nausea and vomiting. The friend's mother called to say she couldn't take Emma in her current condition, which meant my evening plans were canceled. I spent the night cleaning up vomit, taking Emma's temperature, and monitoring her symptoms instead of enjoying adult conversation and potential romance. Amy was understanding when I called to explain the situation, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice. We tried to reschedule twice more over the following weeks, but each time something came up with Emma's schedule or needs. Eventually, Amy stopped responding to my messages, and I couldn't blame her. What woman wants to date someone whose life is completely controlled by an 8-year-old schedule? The final blow came when my parents presented me with what they called a family contract. Carol had printed it out on official letterhead from their accounting firm, making it look like a legal document. The contract formalized my role as Emma's backup guardian, required me to add her to my health insurance through my job, and officially designated my rent reduction as compensation for child care services rendered. Frank pushed the paper toward me with a pen, both of my parents wearing identical smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The document was 3 pages long and covered everything from my responsibility for Emma's transportation to my obligation to maintain her activity schedule. Reading through it felt like reviewing the terms of my own enslavement. Sign this or find somewhere else to live by Friday. Carol said, her voice sweet, but her eyes cold as steel. And good luck affording first month last month and security deposit anywhere decent in this market. Frank nodded along silently, avoiding eye contact, but clearly in complete agreement with the ultimatum. They had calculated everything perfectly. With my depleted savings and damaged work performance, I couldn't afford to move out, but staying meant signing away any hope of independence or personal growth. As I stared at the contract, I realized they weren't just asking me to be Emma's caregiver. They were asking me to sacrifice my entire future for their convenience, and they were using my financial vulnerability to force compliance. The document would legally bind me to responsibilities that would make it impossible to advance my career, maintain relationships, or build any kind of life outside their control. The trap had been set with surgical precision, and I was caught in the middle with no apparent way out. The contract deadline was Thursday, giving me exactly 5 days to decide between signing away my future or facing homelessness with barely enough money for a security deposit. The weight of that decision pressed down on me like a physical force, making it difficult to sleep or concentrate on anything else. But Wednesday morning brought an unexpected ally. Sarah, my neighbor from 2 houses down, knocked on my door while I was getting Emma ready for school. Sarah was a 30-year-old single mother who worked as a paralegal and had always been friendly, but never intrusive. Her timing that morning wasn't accidental. "Damon, can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, glancing around to make sure my parents weren't within earshot. "I've been watching what's happening here and I'm concerned." We stepped onto the front porch while Emma finished her breakfast inside. Sarah's expression was serious, and I could tell she had been thinking about this conversation for a while. "I've lived on this street for 3 years," she began, "and I've never seen anything quite like what your parents are doing to you. The way they've trapped you into being Emma's caregiver, the way they control your schedule and finances, it's not healthy and it's not normal." Her validation of what I'd been feeling was like a lifeline. For weeks I had wondered if I was overreacting or being selfish, but hearing an outside observer confirm my concerns gave me clarity about the situation. "I've been documenting some of what I've witnessed." Sarah continued, pulling out her phone. "The times they've left for entire weekends while you dealt with Emma's care, the way they talk about you when they're in the front yard, the fact that you're clearly struggling under this arrangement." She showed me photos she had taken of my parents loading their boat on Friday afternoons while I was dealing with Emma's homework meltdowns. Screenshots of their social media posts showing expensive dinners while I managed bedtime routines and school projects. Notes about the times she had heard Carol on the phone discussing their brilliant solution to their childcare costs. "If you ever need someone to testify about what this arrangement really looks like from the outside," Sarah said, "I'm willing to help." What they're doing to you isn't legal guardianship or normal family support, it's exploitation. That same morning, I received an unexpected call from Jessica. I hadn't heard from her since the freelance project had fallen through, and I assumed she had written me off completely. Her voice was warm, but concerned when I answered. Damon, I heard through the grapevine about your job situation, she said. Ryan mentioned that you've been having some challenges at work, and I wanted to reach out. I was surprised that my coworkers had been discussing my problems, but Jessica's next words caught me completely off guard. I know the e-commerce project didn't work out because of your family obligations, but I have another opportunity that might be more flexible. It's smaller, but it pays $1,500 and can be done completely remotely on your own schedule. I could even provide an advance payment if that would help. The offer was like a ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Remote work would mean I could potentially manage both the project and Emma's schedule, and an advance payment could give me some financial breathing room. But more importantly, Jessica's willingness to offer me another chance despite the previous disappointment showed that my professional reputation might not be as damaged as I feared. My friend Brad called that evening with news that changed everything. His tech company in Denver was expanding rapidly and looking for experienced developers who could work remotely initially and potentially relocate within 6 months. The position paid significantly more than my current job and included relocation assistance plus a signing bonus. I've already talked to my manager about you, Brad said excitedly. She's willing to do a video interview as early as tomorrow if you're interested. The remote work would start Monday, which means you could get out of your current situation immediately. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of genuine hope. But that hope was quickly dampened by the reality of my current obligations. Even if I got the job, how could I start on Monday when I was committed to picking up Emma from school every day? How could I explain to a new employer that I couldn't work normal hours because I was trapped in an exploitative family arrangement? Thursday evening brought the final straw that pushed me over the edge completely. I was helping Emma with her science project at the kitchen table when I heard my parents talking in the living room. They weren't trying to hide their conversation, apparently assuming I was too focused on homework help to pay attention. The European vacation is going to be perfect timing, Carol was saying. 2 weeks in Italy, just the two of us. We haven't had a real vacation without children in years. Frank's response made my blood run cold. What about Emma? We can't exactly bring her on a romantic getaway. Carol laughed and the sound was like nails on a chalkboard. That's the beauty of our arrangement with Damon. He'll handle everything while we're gone. Emma won't even miss us because her routine will stay exactly the same. But won't he object to basically being a live-in nanny for 2 weeks? What's he going to do about it? Carol's voice was full of smug satisfaction. By then he'll have signed the contract and he'll be too beaten down to fight back. We own him now, Frank. He's completely dependent on us. Frank chuckled along with her cruel assessment. I never thought our mistake of a son would actually become useful, but this arrangement has worked out better than we could have imagined. Their casual cruelty in discussing my situation was devastating enough. But then Carol revealed something that made my hands shake with rage. I've been thinking we should have Damon move to the basement, she said. Emma needs stability, and it would be better for her to have the larger bedroom upstairs. Plus, if Damon is down in the basement, he'll be even more isolated and less likely to cause problems. The basement was unfinished cold and barely suitable for storage, let alone human habitation. The idea that they wanted to move me down there like some kind of servant was the final insult. I realized that in their minds, I wasn't their son anymore. I was just free labor that they could manipulate and control without consequence. Emma looked up from her science project and noticed the expression on my face. Are you okay, Damon? You look really upset. I forced a smile and helped her finish gluing cotton balls to her cloud poster, but inside, I was making a decision that would change everything. I couldn't sign that contract. I couldn't accept another day of this treatment. and I couldn't let them continue to destroy my future for their convenience. That night, I lay awake planning my escape. Sarah's offer of documentation and testimony gave me legal protection. Jessica's freelance project provided immediate income. Brad's job opportunity offered a path to independence. The pieces were falling into place, but I would need to move carefully and quickly. Friday morning, I told my parents I needed the weekend to consider their contract terms. Carol smiled triumphantly, clearly interpreting my request as surrender. Frank nodded approvingly, probably relieved that the situation was resolving without conflict. But they had no idea what I was really planning. Their failure son was about to show them exactly how much they had underestimated his determination to build a life worth living. Friday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in my 2 years at the company. The guilt of lying to Marcus was overwhelming, but I needed a full day to set my escape plan in motion. My parents assumed I was home because of stress about their contract deadline, which worked perfectly for what I needed to accomplish. The first call I made was to the legal aid attorney Sarah had recommended. Patricia Hernandez was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in housing law and family exploitation cases. When I explained my situation, she listened carefully and asked pointed questions about the verbal agreements, written communications, and financial arrangements. What your parents are doing walks a very thin line legally, Patricia explained. They can't raise your rent without proper written notice, and they certainly can't make housing contingent on unpaid labor. The fact that they've already canceled services and made unilateral decisions about your responsibilities could be considered coercive behavior. She agreed to review the contract my parents wanted me to sign and provide a written legal opinion about its enforceability. More importantly, she confirmed that I had tenant rights that couldn't be waived even under family pressure. My second call was to Jessica accepting her freelance project with the advance payment. The relief in her voice when I explained that I would soon have more flexible scheduling was encouraging. She agreed to wire $1,500 to my account immediately, with the remaining $1,500 due upon project completion. The conversation with Brad's manager went better than I had dared to hope. Lisa Chen was impressed with my portfolio and seemed understanding when I explained that I was in a challenging family situation that required immediate resolution. The remote position would start Monday with the option to relocate to Denver within 3 to 6 months. The signing bonus alone was enough to cover moving expenses and several months of rent. But the most crucial conversation was with Sarah. When I told her about my plans to leave, she didn't try to talk me out of it or suggest I work things out with my parents. Instead, she offered practical support that could make the difference between success and failure. My brother owns a storage facility across town, she said. You can move your essential belongings there this weekend without anyone noticing. I'll help you load everything Saturday morning while your parents are at their tennis tournament. She had clearly been planning this conversation for days. Sarah understood that my situation wasn't just uncomfortable or inconvenient, it was genuinely damaging to my future and psychological well-being. Her willingness to actively help rather than just offer sympathy showed me that I wasn't crazy for wanting to escape. Saturday morning came with perfect timing. Carol and Frank left early for their weekend tennis tournament, planning to be gone until late afternoon. Emma was at a sleepover with her friend Madison, which meant I had several hours of uninterrupted time to execute the first phase of my plan. Sarah arrived at 8 in the morning with her SUV, and we worked systematically to pack my most important possessions. My computer equipment, professional clothes, important documents, and personal items that held sentimental value. Everything fit into dozen boxes that we loaded into her vehicle and transported to the storage unit across town. The process was both liberating and terrifying. Each box I packed represented another step toward independence, but also another bridge burned with my family. There would be no going back after this decision, no possibility of reconciliation if my plan failed. While we worked, Sarah shared more of what she had witnessed over the past few months. Your parents talk about you like you're a business asset rather than their son, she said while we loaded my desk chair into her SUV. I've heard Carol on the phone with her friends bragging about how much money they're saving and how trainable you've become. It's honestly disturbing. Her observations confirmed what I had suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. My parents genuinely saw me as a solution to their childcare problem rather than a person with my own needs and goals. The emotional manipulation wasn't accidental. It was a calculated strategy to maintain control over my life and labor. Sunday evening, I sat down to write the most difficult letter of my life. It needed to explain my decision clearly while establishing boundaries for future communication. More importantly, it needed to protect me legally by documenting the coercive behavior and financial manipulation I had endured. The letter took me 3 hours to write and revise. I included specific dates and examples of their manipulative tactics, copies of the threatening text messages about rent increases, and documentation of the expenses I had covered for Emma's care. I calculated that over 2 months I had spent $2,847 on childcare-related expenses while my savings had been depleted by their arrangement. But the most important part of the letter was the final paragraph where I made my position crystal clear. I choose my future over your convenience. Find your own babysitter. I found my own life. As I sealed the letter in an envelope addressed to both of my parents, I felt a mixture of terror and excitement, unlike anything I had experienced since my divorce. Tomorrow morning, I would either be free to build the life I wanted or I would be homeless and struggling to rebuild from nothing. But either option was better than remaining trapped in a situation that was slowly destroying my spirit and potential. I set my alarm for 4:30 in the morning and tried to get some sleep. In 6 hours, my real life would finally begin. My alarm buzzed at 4:30 Sunday morning, but I had been awake for hours already, my mind racing through every detail of my escape plan. The house was completely silent as I moved through my final preparations, double-checking that I hadn't forgotten anything essential. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter where my parents would see it immediately when they came down for their morning coffee. Next to it, I left the unsigned contract, my house keys, and a detailed invoice for $2,847 in childcare expenses I had covered over the past 2 months. If they wanted to treat this arrangement like a business transaction, I would give them a proper accounting of the costs. At 5 o'clock sharp, Sarah pulled into the driveway with her headlights off. We had planned this timing carefully to avoid any possibility of my parents waking up and discovering my departure. My remaining belongings fit into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. Everything I needed to start fresh in a new city with a new job. The drive through my neighborhood felt surreal, like watching my old life shrink in the rearview mirror. Sarah and I didn't talk much during the hour-long drive to her brother's apartment, where I would stay for a few days before finding my own place. The weight of what I had just done was settling in, and I needed time to process the magnitude of the change. At 8 o'clock, my phone started buzzing with calls from my parents. I had turned off the ringer, but I could see Carol's name appearing on the screen every few minutes. Then came the text messages starting angry and becoming increasingly desperate as they realized the full scope of their situation. Get back here immediately. We have plans today, and Emma needs supervision. This is ridiculous and selfish. You're abandoning your family. We'll discuss this when you get home. Don't make this worse than it has to be. Damon, please call us. We can work this out. Where are you? Emma is confused and upset. This isn't fair to Emma. She doesn't understand why you left. The progression from anger to panic was evident in each message. By 10 o'clock, they had realized that Emma's soccer game was starting, and they had no backup plan for supervision. Carol called 6 more times between 10 and noon, but I let every call go to voicemail. Monday morning, I started my new job with Brad's company from a quiet coffee shop near Sarah's brother's apartment. The contrast between my new professional environment and my previous chaotic situation was striking. I could focus completely on the work, participate in video calls without interruption, and actually contribute meaningfully to team discussions. Lisa Chen called at noon to check on my first day, and I was able to report genuine progress on the project I'd been assigned. The relief of having normal working conditions was almost overwhelming after months of trying to juggle professional responsibilities with constant childcare demands. Tuesday brought the first consequences for my parents' business lives. Carol missed an important client meeting because Emma's school called about a forgotten lunch, and no one was available to handle the situation. Frank had to leave work early for an emergency parent-teacher conference when Emma had a meltdown in class, causing him to miss a crucial business presentation. Sarah kept me updated on the neighborhood drama through text messages. She reported increased yelling and arguing coming from my parents' house, multiple frantic phone calls to babysitting services, and what appeared to be heated discussions in their driveway about logistics and blame. Wednesday evening, I received a call that changed everything. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, a professional female voice identified herself as Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services. Mr. Thompson, I'm calling because we've received a report concerning the welfare of a minor in your parents' household. Someone has expressed concerns about the family's childcare arrangements and a recent disruption in the child's routine. My heart started racing. What kind of concerns? I can't discuss the specifics of the report, but I need to schedule interviews with all family members to ensure the child's needs are being met appropriately. This includes you, as you were recently involved in the child's care. The investigation had been triggered by someone who had observed the dysfunction in my parents' household and recognized it as potentially harmful to Emma. Janet explained that they took reports about sudden changes in childcare arrangements very seriously, especially when family members expressed concerns about exploitation or manipulation. We'll need to speak with you about the circumstances that led to your departure from the household, Janet continued. Your perspective on the family dynamics and childcare situation will be important for our assessment. Thursday morning, Carol called me for the first time since my departure. Her voice was shaky and desperate, completely different from the confident, manipulative tone I was accustomed to hearing. Damon, we need to talk. There's been some kind of misunderstanding, and we have people asking questions about Emma's care situation. What kind of questions? Social Services wants to interview all of us about family dynamics and childcare arrangements. They're questioning whether Emma's needs are being met appropriately. Carol's voice cracked slightly. We need you to help explain that everything was fine, that we're a normal family, working through some scheduling challenges. For the first time in our relationship, my mother was asking for my help rather than demanding my compliance. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and she seemed to recognize that her previous tactics wouldn't work in this new situation. I'll speak truthfully with the social worker, I told her. I'll explain exactly what the living arrangement was like and why I felt it was necessary to leave. Damon, please. We may have been too demanding, but we're still family. Can't we work together to resolve this situation without involving outsiders? The irony was stunning. After months of threats, manipulation, and exploitation, Carol was suddenly interested in treating me like a family member whose opinions mattered. But her concern wasn't about my well-being or our relationship. It was about protecting herself from the consequences of her actions. Friday afternoon, Frank called with an offer that revealed just how desperate they had become. He was willing to negotiate a completely new arrangement where I could visit Emma without any childcare responsibilities, where they would respect my career priorities and personal boundaries, and where all communication would go through structured channels to prevent future manipulation. We realized we handled things wrong. Frank admitted, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine remorse. We took advantage of your difficult situation after the divorce, and that wasn't fair to you. But the most telling part of the conversation was what he didn't say. There was no apology for the emotional manipulation, no acknowledgement of the damage done to my career and relationships, and no recognition of the fundamental disrespect they had shown for my autonomy and goals. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my parents were now experiencing the consequences of their actions for the first time. They had to manage Emma's full schedule themselves, deal with the financial cost of professional childcare, and face scrutiny from outside authorities about their family dynamics. The tables had completely turned. Instead of me begging for reasonable treatment, they were desperately trying to convince me to help them avoid the legal and social consequences of their manipulative behavior. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my own life again. 3 weeks after my escape, I was sitting in my new one-bedroom apartment in downtown Denver, looking out at the mountain views I had dreamed about during those suffocating months in my childhood bedroom. The apartment was small, but entirely mine, furnished with pieces I had chosen organized according to my preferences, and most importantly, free from anyone else's control or manipulation. The phone rang, interrupting my peaceful Saturday morning coffee routine. Carol's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something about the timing felt different, less desperate than her previous calls. Damon. Her voice was quiet, hesitant, in a way I had never heard before. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "I have time," I replied, settling back into my chair. "The social worker finished her investigation," Carol began. "She's recommending family counseling for 6 months and some changes in how we handle Emma's care. But she also said that your willingness to speak honestly about the family situation helped her understand what was really happening." There was a long pause before she continued. "I need to apologize to you. Really apologize, not just because we're in trouble, but because I finally understand what we did to you." The conversation that followed was unlike any I had ever had with my mother. For the first time, Carol acknowledged that she had viewed me as a solution to her inconvenience rather than as her son with rights and goals of his own. She admitted that the manipulation had been calculated and cruel, designed to exploit my vulnerable financial situation for their benefit. "I convinced myself that we were helping you by giving you a place to live," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But the truth is we trapped you and then convinced ourselves that you should be grateful for the cage." Frank got on the phone to add his own apology, acknowledging that his passive acceptance of Carol's schemes had been just as damaging as her active manipulation. He admitted that he had been a coward avoiding conflict while allowing his son to be emotionally and financially exploited. The changes in their household had been dramatic and ultimately positive for everyone involved. Without me as their unpaid safety net, Carol and Frank had been forced to take direct responsibility for Emma's care and activities. This had led to some surprising discoveries about their daughter and their own capabilities as parents. "We actually enjoy spending time with Emma when we're not trying to shuffle her off to someone else," Frank said with what sounded like genuine surprise. "Last weekend we took her hiking instead of going to the boat, and she loved it. We all did." Emma had initially struggled with the change in routine, but with consistent professional after-school care and more engaged parenting from Carol and Frank, she had actually become more independent and emotionally stable. The behavioral issues that had made caring for her so challenging had largely disappeared when her parents established clear boundaries and consistent expectations. "She misses you," Carol said carefully. "But she's not confused about her care anymore. She knows that Frank and I are responsible for her, and she seems more secure with that clarity." 6 months later, I received an invitation that surprised me: Emma's 9th birthday party. Not as a caregiver or supervisor, but as her brother, who lived in another state and would be visiting for the weekend. I decided to accept, curious to see how the family dynamics had evolved. The house felt completely different when I walked through the front door. The frantic, chaotic energy that had defined my parents' approach to family life had been replaced by something calmer and more organized. Emma ran to hug me, but then immediately returned to helping Carol set up party decorations. Frank was in the kitchen preparing food, actually engaged in the domestic tasks rather than hiding behind work obligations. During the party, I observed interactions that would have been impossible during my time as Emma's forced caregiver. Carol patiently managed a group of 9-year-olds without panic or resentment. Frank played games and supervised activities without constantly checking his phone or looking for escape routes. Emma had friends over, but didn't demand constant adult attention, having learned to entertain herself and resolve minor conflicts independently. "It's amazing what happens when you actually choose to be present," Carol said to me while we cleaned up after the guests had left. When I stopped seeing Emma as an inconvenience to be managed, I started appreciating who she is as a person. Frank nodded in agreement. "We thought we were too busy for hands-on parenting, but the truth is we were just too lazy and selfish. Having you handle everything allowed us to avoid growing up ourselves." The family counseling had helped them understand that their manipulation of me wasn't just wrong, it had been harmful to Emma as well. Children need to know who their primary caregivers are, and the confusion about roles and responsibilities had contributed to her behavioral problems. Emma had also benefited from seeing her parents take ownership of their responsibilities. Instead of viewing her as a burden to be shifted around Carol, and Frank had learned to see parenting as an opportunity for connection and growth. As I prepared to leave Sunday evening, Emma gave me a drawing she had made of our family. In her picture, Carol and Frank stood on either side of her, clearly identified as Mom and Dad. I was drawn separately, labeled as Brother Damon in Colorado, with a big smile and airplane connecting us. "I know you had to move away, because Mom and Dad were being mean to you," she said, with the clarity that children sometimes possess about adult situations. "But I'm glad you're happy now, and I'm glad Mom and Dad learned how to take care of me properly." Her understanding of the situation was remarkably mature for a 9-year-old, and it reinforced my belief that children are often more resilient and perceptive than adults give them credit for. The drive back to Denver gave me time to reflect on the profound life lesson this experience had taught me. For months, I'd convinced myself that accepting mistreatment was necessary for financial survival and family harmony. I had allowed fear and guilt to trap me in a situation that was slowly destroying my potential and self-respect. But walking away from that toxicity hadn't just saved my career and relationships, it had forced my parents to grow as people and parents. By refusing to enable their dysfunction, I had created space for genuine healing and positive change. The most important realization was that protecting your future isn't selfish. It's essential for your ability to contribute meaningfully to others' lives. When I was trapped and resentful, caring for Emma felt like a burden that bred anger and frustration. Now, as her brother rather than her unpaid caregiver, I could offer genuine love and support without sacrificing my own well-being. My career had flourished in the months since leaving my parents' house. The remote work arrangement had led to a promotion and increased responsibility, and I was considering Brad's offer to relocate permanently to Denver for an even better position. Jessica and I had reconnected professionally and personally, and our relationship was developing naturally without the stress and chaos that had defined my previous living situation. Most importantly, I had learned to recognize manipulation disguised as family obligation. True family support means wanting each member to thrive independently, not trapping them in dysfunctional arrangements for convenience or profit. Love doesn't require sacrificing your future, and anyone who asks you to choose between their comfort and your growth isn't acting in your best interest. The financial independence I had worked so hard to achieve wasn't just about money. It was about having the freedom to make choices based on my values rather than my vulnerabilities. When you're not desperate, you can't be easily exploited. And when you're not trapped, you can afford to demand the respect you deserve. As I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've chosen courage over comfort, growth over stagnation, and self-respect over false peace. My parents had learned to be better people and parents because I had refused to enable their worst impulses. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to participate in dysfunction, even if it means temporary conflict and discomfort. Real healing requires truth accountability and change, not silent acceptance of unacceptable behavior. I learned that protecting your future isn't selfish. It's the foundation that allows you to genuinely care for others from a place of strength instead of resentment. And that lesson has made all the difference in building relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family obligations felt more like manipulation than genuine support? How did you handle the conflict between loyalty and self-preservation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's struggling with similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it who might need to hear this message. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming difficult family dynamics and finding the courage to choose your own path. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might be dealing with similar manipulation disguised as family responsibility. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember, you have the right to build a life that reflects your values and goals, even if others don't understand or approve of your choices. Your future is worth protecting, and you deserve relationships based on respect rather than exploitation.